Hey everybody, it's Aiden here once again with another Storytime episode. Now, I know I said I was going to do this next week, but I have the mother of all migraines today, so I'm going to do it today, but still do another Storytime next week. Now today, we're looking at another race that produced a hectic and chaotic event and produced an unlikely winner. We're talking today about the 1996 Monaco Grand Prix. Monaco, like Bathurst and the Nürburgring, is regarded as one of the world's most difficult tracks. There's no room for error as there's walls either side of the track, there's little to no runoff area on each corner, and a safety car is guaranteed in the modern era if someone does crash. Over the years, the walls have claimed the egos of many drivers. Ayrton Senna crashed out of the lead at Poitiers, Max Verstappen crashed every day across a race weekend in 2016, Felipe Massa went in heavily at Saint-Devote, and so on. Even though many know their way around, very few have mastered it. At the start of the weekend, in the years leading up to the 1996 edition, nobody had won the race from lower than 8th, and even then, that was because Monaco was always a race of attrition. Brakes would go, driver error would mean a shunt into the barriers, and gearbox would fail after going up and down the gears too many times for the box to take. It seemed, with the dominance of the Williams team so far in this season and the re-emergence of Ferrari, it would be either one of those two teams on pole position. Add in the fact that Williams had won every race up until this point, it would be certain that one of the two Williams cars would win the race. Although, with the Ferrari having a decent chassis and Michael Schumacher behind the wheel, it could be a 3-horse race for the checkered flag. After all, Schumacher had finished second in the preceding San Marino Grand Prix, and he had grabbed pole. The Ferrari was the second best car on the grid, albeit highly unreliable. Schumacher and Ferrari fans like to make out that the car was an absolute dog that won 3 races because of Michael's superior driving skill, but at the start of the season, it was a good car. Not the best, but it was good. It was just unreliable, and that would plague both Schumacher and Irvine all year. Most embarrassingly, at the French Grand Prix, Schumacher's engine exploded on the formation lap, and at Montreal he was left stranded on the grid while everyone else left the line. The cars won races that the Williams cars had bad races at. At Barcelona, Hill spun off in the rain and Villeneuve ran a setup for drying weather rather than the full wet that Schumacher had. At Monza, Hill broke his suspension and Villeneuve damaged his floor going across the gravel, and at Spa, Schumacher beat them using a highly improved car by that point. Okay. Schumacher's talent extracted a lot from the car, but you can't act like it was all him. In my opinion, that just undermines the efforts of the engineers. Now, don't think that whole last passage was just my attempt at trying to slag off Michael Schumacher. That's what the Jerez video was for. But in all seriousness, he was a good driver. All that said, Schumacher managed to grab pole on Saturday afternoon with a 1:20.356, some half a second faster than Damon Hill, who in turn only just pipped Jean Alesi's Benetton. Rubens Barrichello put his Jordan on the third row ahead of Eddie Irvine, while the two Ligiers were 14th and 17th. Their Mugen Hondas were misfiring in the session, and it was the best they could do. The car had been improving all year and was showing promise of being a competent midfield runner to fight with McLaren, Jordan and Sauber, rather than against the two footwork and Tyrrell cars. Astonishingly, our friends over at 40 put their brand new FG03s on the back row and were well within the 107% time. Andrea Montermini, the final qualifier, set a 1:25.393, half a second from the 1:25.981 cutoff point. In fact, Luca Badoa was only 1/10 off Riccardo Tosser Rossit's 20th place time, which in turn was 2 full seconds off Pedro Lami's time. The two Minardi cars had a great qualifying run on this occasion. Martin Brundle had a terrible session and could only manage 16th in his Jordan, while Jacques Villeneuve on his first visit to the circuit could only manage 10th, a full second behind his teammate Hill. Schumacher's pole position, along with a lot of other events in his career, was the subject of controversy. After he put in his fastest lap that got him pole, Schumacher slowed down to acknowledge the crowd. However, Gerhard Berger was on a flying lap that would have seen him improve on his previous best, and coming through the blind right-hander in the tunnel, Berger saw Schumacher at the last second and swerved to avoid him. Berger was then seen flying backwards into the chicane, although he miraculously got out of it without damaging the car. On the morning of the race, there used to be a warm-up session where cars would be allowed to put full tanks of fuel in the car and do a series of laps to get acclimatised for the race. In 2003, the session was scrapped and Friday practice was instead extended to a 2-hour session, as at the time cars had to qualify on race fuel. So the FIA figured if they're going to be qualifying on race fuel, then they would already be warmed up, so there's no need to have a warm-up. Oh, Max Mosley, you crazy man. In the warm-up, Olivier Panis in the Ligier went fastest, which gave his engineers hope since they'd been up all night trying to fix the misfire issue on his and teammate Pedro Diniz' cars. Villeneuve finished down in 18th place as his setup had changed in anticipation of rain arriving either just before the race or even during the race. Panis believed he would make the podium with how well his car had performed in the warm-up, but his wife Anne was not so optimistic. Not only was Monaco ridiculously difficult to overtake at, there were still several barriers between him and third place. Hill, Schumacher, Hakkinen, Coulthard, Irvine, Barrichello, Herbert, and others. Schumacher was already a double world champion and would make the record books his own. Hill would win the championship that year, Villeneuve would win it the following year, and Hakkinen would go on to be a double world champion. After the warm-up though, it pissed it down. So much that a support race had to be abandoned and it was dark and visibility was not so good. As it had been the first time rain had fallen all weekend, the officials allowed another 15-minute warm-up session to allow teams to get a wet-up sorted on the grounds of safety. It was not expected to rain again, but just to be safe and all that. Andrea Montermini wrecked his 40 in this session, and the lack of spare car meant there was no way he'd be able to start the race, so only 21 drivers made the start line. Several other drivers had issues in the session, including Pedro Lamy, Pedro Diniz and Giancarlo Fisichella, but all escaped without damage. Hakkinen damaged his McLaren, but it was easily fixed with McLaren's budget, and Alesi suffered a puncture. Verstappen and Rosset were the only two cars not to take part, as footwork had no spares like 40, and any crash would have meant weekend over. It has to be said though that while 40 had no spare parts because, well, 40, footwork had no spare parts because Verstappen and the Tosser were trying to improve the aerodynamic qualities of their cars by twatting them into walls all weekend. At the start, in gloomy conditions and a wet track, it was Hill that got the better start and comfortably managed to outdrag Schumacher in the run-up to Saint-Devote. As the field started the long climb up the hill into Massenet and Casino Square, Verstappen, who oddly had decided to start the race on slicks, slid straight into the barrier. At the same time, the two Minardis of Lamy and Fisichella collided, ending their race. It was a shame to lose Verstappen so soon. After a great performance at a wet Brazilian Grand Prix in which he had the fastest lap at one point, it was certain he'd repeat his performance. A Verstappen having a great performance in a wet Brazilian Grand Prix. Where have we seen that before? Further round, it was Schumacher's turn next. As he came into the lower Mirabeau, which is the corner after the Lowe's hairpin, he got his right front onto the inside curb and crippled his left front on the outside wall. A rare error for someone who was regarded to be the Rainmaster. So by the end of the first lap, as well as Montermini, who never made the start, Verstappen, Lamy, Fisichella, Schumacher and Barrichello were all out of the race. At the end of lap 2, Hill's lead over Alesi was over 4 seconds. Then it was the other Benetton of Berger, the sole remaining Ferrari of Irvine, who in turn was pursued by Frentzen in the Sauber, Coulthard in the McLaren and Villeneuve in the other Williams, who had managed to make 3 places in the opening chaos. After 5 laps, Ukyo Katayama's Tyrrell ended up in a wall after his throttle got stuck open. The Tosser also crashed out, ending Footwork's weekend, and Diniz's gearbox gave up the ghost. Hill, Alesi and Berger began to pull away as Irvine led an impatient 9-car queue around the streets of Monaco. By lap 10, Berger had to retire as his gearbox also failed, and Frentzen lost his front wing on lap 18 after trying to overtake Irvine at Saint-Devote, demoting him to second last ahead of Lucas Badoa's 40 that was just making up the numbers. On lap 28, Hill entered the pits for his first stop, topping the Williams up with fuel and making the switch to slick tyres, and it allowed Alesi to head out into the lead. Irvine also pitted for slicks, as did Panis and Coulthard, with DC wearing Schumacher's spare helmet for the race as his kept steaming up. On lap 31, Martin Brundle's race finally ended when he spun off. Ligier were running a calculated gamble in this race to get Panis as far up as they possibly could when the stops came round. Instead of putting in fuel for about 28 to 30 laps as Williams had done with Damon Hill for instance, Ligier decided to just bring the tank at the top and only change tyres like they do in Formula 1 today. That way, Olivier would be losing less time in the pit lane, and while he would be slower at the start of the race, he would get quicker as the race went on. Suicidal anywhere else, but at Monaco, with it being so hard to overtake, it kind of worked in their favour. It was an absolutely genius move. Panis was now in 4th and he was chasing Irvine, catching the Northern Irishman out with a brave dive bomb into the Lowe's hairpin on lap 36. Irvine had done his belts after the incident believing he was out, but miraculously, after a push from the marshals to get him out of the wall, he managed to get the car jump started again. What's even better here is that Ferrari were convinced that could not be done. Eddie had to come back into the pits to get his seatbelts redone, which cost him even more time. With the race almost a foregone conclusion, Hill's engine blew up on lap 41 as he went through the tunnel. It denied him the chance to emulate his father Graham with a win on the streets of Monaco, and 1996 would have been his best chance to do it. But what was despair for Williams was joy for Benetton, as Alesi had now retaken the lead. Panis was promoted in 2nd place despite losing 10 seconds after a spin on oil dumped by Hill's Williams just prior to the engine failure. On lap 51, Alesi was in the pits again. He was complaining of a handling problem, but the team could not work out what was wrong with the car, so they just put a fresh set of slicks on and sent him on his way. On the next lap he was in again. A spring had gone off his Benetton and it cost him a potentially easy victory. Another case of Jean Alesi being highly unlucky. This now promoted Panis into the lead. Sauber were pleased as well, as all the commotion meant that while Panis was leading and Coulthard was running second, Herbert and Frentzen were still running third and fourth. With Olivier leading, it was now Anne Panis that was looking like the silly one. It was a tense moment for everybody involved. For Anne, her new husband was leading a Grand Prix. For Ligier, it would be their first win since 1981. For Mugen, it would be their first ever victory in F1. And for the locals, it would be a French driver in a French car sponsored by a French fag company winning in Monaco. Coulthard's McLaren was closing in and Olivier was radioed by the team telling him to go easy on his fuel. "Why? I can see David in my mirrors everywhere," he radioed back. Over at McLaren, they were convinced that Olivier would hit trouble and would have to come in for some fuel. Neil Oakley, the designer of the car, took a chance with the rest of the team to have David back off slightly so he could cruise to victory when Panis inevitably had to pit. Over at Ligier, they feared the same. Panis' radio engineer Paolo Catoni radioed the Frenchman with 2 laps to go. "Olivier, we have to pit, we do not have fuel to get to the end." Panis ignored the instruction. Shades of Jamie Whincup at Bathurst 2014 it seems. "Look Paolo," he eventually replied, "we can be heroes or we can end up looking like idiots. If I run out of fuel before the end, bad luck. If I win, we win. I'm not stopping." On lap 66, Luca Badoa's slow, and by slow I mean 6 laps down 40, took out Villeneuve on the run into the hairpin. Hakkinen in the process was promoted to 5th, and Mika Salo followed him through into 6th. And with about 2 laps to go, Irvine's eventful race ended where Schumacher's had on lap 1. Unsighted, Hakkinen and Salo joined him in a 3-car pileup at the lower Mirabeau. Unfortunately for Coulthard and McLaren, and very fortunately for Panis and Ligier, the 2-hour time limit expired and the checkered flag dropped 3 laps before the planned end. The most improbable win had just happened. After the race, the team tried to restart the car. There was no fuel left to turn the engine over. Happily though, the car passed all the post-race scrutineering checks. Only 3 cars crossed the finish line in the end: Panis, Coulthard and Herbert. Frentzen was running last and pulled into the pits on the final lap as he was finishing last anyway and everyone else had seen the checkered flag. So only Panis, Coulthard and Herbert were counted as finishing, even though Frentzen was still running. Frentzen was classified 4th, and Salo and Hakkinen were credited with 5th and 6th as they had met their end just after Irvine, who in turn was classed 7th. If the modern point system had been in place, Luca Badoa would have received a point for 40 as he was classified 10th. 40 would also have received another point at San Marino as Montermini had finished 10th in that race. In fact, if the current system had been in place, 40 would have scored points along with Minardi that season despite going bust halfway through. The full video on 40 can be seen by clicking the card at the top right of your screen. Panis never won another race, but was having a great 1997 season where he would have been on course for 4th in the standings, later 3rd after Schumacher's expulsion, had it not been for a horrendous accident at Montreal in which he broke his legs. The Ligier team was sold to Alain Prost at the end of 1996 and became the Prost Grand Prix team between 1997 and 2001 when it collapsed. Panis would later race for BIR and Toyota after a stint with the Prost team that encompassed a career of 158 Grand Prix. He now divides his time between commentating on sports car events, ice racing, that's actual racing on ice, not iRacing, and nursing his son's karting career. So that was the full story of the 1996 Monaco Grand Prix. It's a little different to the others. I've just got straight to the point in this one and just told the story, but like I said at the beginning, I am struggling. So let me know which of these stories has been the best so far, and I'll try to make every one similar to that one in the future, because I know that that structure works, if that makes any sense. But thank you very much for watching. I'm going to go and have a lie down. Remember to like and subscribe for future videos, and I'll see you again on Monday. I've been Aidan Millward. Have a great day wherever you live in the world, and goodbye.